At family dinner, I smiled and said, "I'm so excited for the trip next week." My sister laughed. "You're joking, right? We got back yesterday." My aunt showed me the photos, all smiles in Costa Rica. I even helped pay for it. I just got up and left. Now they're the ones who regret everything. I, 32M, walked into Mom's dining room last Sunday with a genuine smile on my face, excited to catch up with everyone after what I thought had been a busy week for the family. The usual suspects were there: Mom, Dad, my sister, my aunt, and a few cousins scattered around the mahogany table that had hosted our family dinners for as long as I could remember. The conversation was flowing as normal when I decided to bring up what I thought was our upcoming family vacation. I mentioned how excited I was for the Costa Rica trip next week, how I'd been looking forward to it for months, and how grateful I was that we'd finally have some quality family time together. The room went silent. Not the comfortable kind of silence that sometimes falls over dinner conversations, but the heavy, awkward kind that makes your stomach drop before your brain even processes why. My sister was the first to break it. She laughed, not a happy laugh, but the kind that cuts through you. She told me I had to be joking, that they'd gotten back yesterday. The words hit me like a physical blow. I must have looked confused because she kept talking, explaining that the trip had been amazing, that everyone had such a great time. My aunt, sitting across from me, seemed to sense my confusion. She pulled out her phone with what I can only describe as misplaced enthusiasm and started showing me photos. There they all were: Mom, Dad, my sister, my aunt, my cousins, all smiles on pristine beaches, zip-lining through rainforests, enjoying fancy dinners at what looked like expensive restaurants. Every single person who was sitting at that table right now had been on this trip. Every single person except me. The photos kept coming. Group shots at the airport, sunset dinners, adventures I'd been dreaming about for months. All while I'd been sitting at home, working extra hours to help cover what I thought were the remaining costs for our family vacation. I sat there staring at the phone screen, trying to process what I was seeing. The worst part wasn't even that they'd gone without me. It was that they looked so genuinely happy. No one looked guilty or like they were missing something. Or someone. I asked when they'd left, trying to piece together the timeline. Mom told me they'd left last Monday morning, been gone for a full week, and returned Saturday night. I'd been working overtime last week, trying to finish a big project before what I thought was our departure date. I'd even declined drinks with colleagues Friday night because I wanted to be well-rested for our big family adventure. The reality started sinking in. While I'd been meal prepping and doing laundry and organizing my work schedule around our supposed family trip, they'd been living it up in paradise. While I'd been excitedly texting the family group chat about packing tips and asking if anyone needed me to pick up extra sunscreen, they'd been boarding planes and checking into resorts. I asked why I hadn't been told about the date change. That's when Dad spoke up, saying there hadn't been a date change. They'd planned to leave Monday all along. He said it so matter-of-factly, like I was the one who'd gotten confused about something trivial. But here's what really twisted the knife. 3 months ago, when this trip was first being planned, I'd contributed $2,800 to what I was told was the family fund for accommodations and activities. I'd liquidated a small investment account to make that contribution because I wanted to ensure everyone could participate in this dream vacation we'd been talking about for over a year. I asked about my contribution to the trip fund. The table got quiet again. My sister said they'd figured I couldn't get the time off work anyway, so they'd just used my money toward the group expenses and decided not to burden me with the stress of trying to arrange vacation time. Let me repeat that. They'd taken my money and used it to fund a vacation they never intended to invite me on, under the guise of doing me a favor. I looked around the table at all their faces, faces that had been laughing and sharing stories from their amazing week just minutes before. Now they looked uncomfortable, but not guilty. More like they were annoyed that I was making their dinner awkward by bringing up this unfortunate misunderstanding. That's when it hit me. This wasn't a misunderstanding or miscommunication. This was deliberate. They'd planned a family vacation, taken my money to help pay for it, and simply decided I wasn't family enough to actually join them. I stood up from the table without saying another word. Mom asked where I was going, and I told her I was heading home. She said we were in the middle of dinner, that it seemed rude to leave early. I told her I thought a lot of things seemed rude lately. I drove home in a fog. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. This wasn't just about a vacation. It was about years of feeling like the family member who was expected to contribute but not truly included. The one who helped pay for things, but wasn't quite important enough to actually participate in them. Over the next few days, I started putting pieces together. I realized that several family events over the past year had happened without me. Birthday celebrations I'd heard about after the fact. Spontaneous gatherings that somehow everyone else had been available for. I'd attributed it to busy schedules and miscommunication, but now I was seeing a pattern. I also started thinking about my financial contributions to various family situations. I'd helped with Dad's car repair last year, contributed to my cousin's wedding gift, pitched in for Mom's birthday celebration. Always quick to help, never questioning where the money went or why I sometimes felt disconnected from the very events I was helping to fund. By Wednesday, I'd made a decision. If my family wanted to treat me like a financial contributor rather than an actual family member, I could work with that arrangement. But it was going to be on my terms from now on. I started by doing something I should have done years ago. I pulled all my financial records and calculated exactly how much money I'd contributed to various family expenses over the past 3 years. The number was staggering. Nearly $15,000 in various contributions, gifts, emergency help, and shared expenses. Then I calculated what my fair share should have been if I'd actually been included in all the events and experiences that money had funded. The difference was about $8,200, money I'd contributed to family experiences I'd never been properly included in. I drafted a detailed email to the family group chat. I thanked them for helping me realize that our relationship had become primarily financial rather than familial. I outlined every contribution I'd made over the past 3 years and requested reimbursement for my portion of expenses for events I hadn't been included in, starting with the Costa Rica trip. But I didn't send it. Instead, I decided to take a more strategic approach. I called my cousin who worked in law, not the cousin who'd gone on the trip, but another one who'd always been straight with me. I explained the situation and asked if there were any legal implications to consider. He told me that while I probably couldn't recover the money legally, I had every right to establish boundaries about future financial contributions. More importantly, he shared something I hadn't known. Apparently, family members had been joking for years about how easy it was to get money out of me for various things. They called it tapping the well behind my back. He thought I knew and was okay with it, which is why he'd never said anything. That conversation changed everything. This wasn't just about being excluded from a vacation. This was about years of financial manipulation disguised as family loyalty. I decided to take a two-pronged approach to address this situation. First, I established strict financial boundaries. I opened a separate savings account and rerouted all my discretionary income into it. When family members asked for contributions to anything, and they did, within just a few weeks, I told them I was experiencing some financial tightness and couldn't contribute right now. Second, I started documenting everything. Every family gathering I wasn't invited to, every expense I was asked to contribute to, every event I heard about after the fact. I kept meticulous records, not for legal purposes, but to maintain my own sanity and remind myself that I wasn't imagining the pattern. The first real test came 6 weeks later when my sister's birthday was approaching. Traditionally, the family pooled money for a big celebration and gift. Mom called asking for my usual contribution of $300. I told her I wouldn't be contributing this year, but hoped my sister had a wonderful birthday. Mom was confused and a little frustrated. She asked if I was still upset about the vacation mix-up. I told her it hadn't been a mix-up and that I was reevaluating my financial priorities. She said it seemed petty to punish my sister over a travel misunderstanding. I told her I wasn't punishing anyone. I was simply choosing not to fund celebrations I wouldn't be fully included in. She assured me I was invited to the birthday dinner. I asked her to send me the details, and she said she'd get back to me. She never did. 2 weeks later, I saw photos from my sister's birthday celebration on social media. It had been a weekend trip to a winery upstate, something that would have been impossible for me to attend on short notice, assuming I'd ever been actually invited with proper advance notice. But here's the thing that really validated my new approach. They'd still managed to have their celebration without my financial contribution. The world hadn't ended. My sister had still enjoyed her birthday. They'd simply had to cover the costs themselves like normal adults. This pattern repeated itself over the following months. Family events happened. I wasn't included in the planning or inviting, but somehow there was always an expectation that I'd contribute financially. And when I didn't, they managed just fine without my money. Update 1. 3 months into my new boundaries, something interesting happened. My aunt, the same one who'd shown me the Costa Rica photos, called to ask if I wanted to join her for lunch. Just the two of us. During that lunch, she apologized. She said she'd realized after that dinner how hurtful it must have been to see those photos and learn about the trip that way. She admitted that the family had gotten into a bad habit of expecting me to fund things without really including me in the experiences. She also shared something that made a lot of pieces fall into place. Apparently, there had been some discussion about whether to invite me on the Costa Rica trip, but my sister had argued that I was too busy with work and would probably stress everyone out by checking emails and taking work calls during what was supposed to be a relaxing vacation. My sister had convinced everyone that using my contribution money, but not inviting me, was actually a kindness. They were sparing me the stress of trying to balance work and family time, and still getting to benefit from the family bonding experience through the photos and stories. The twisted logic was breathtaking. They'd convinced themselves that taking my money and excluding me was actually thoughtful. My aunt said she'd started noticing the pattern after our conversation and realized how unfair it had been. She asked if there was anything she could do to help repair the relationship. I appreciated her apology, but I told her the damage went beyond just the vacation. It was about years of being treated like a financial resource rather than a family member. I said I was open to rebuilding relationships, but only if they were based on mutual respect rather than financial expectation. That conversation with my aunt apparently sparked some discussions within the family, because over the next few weeks, I received apologetic texts from various family members. Not for the Costa Rica trip specifically, but for misunderstandings and communication issues. None of the apologies acknowledged the financial manipulation aspect, which told me they still didn't fully understand what they'd done wrong. Update 2. The real test of my new boundaries came 6 months later when Dad had a medical emergency. He needed surgery and would be out of work for several weeks. This was exactly the kind of situation where I traditionally stepped in with financial help, no questions asked. Mom called me in tears, explaining the situation and asking if I could help with the medical expenses and lost income. This was different from funding vacations and birthday parties. This was a genuine family crisis. I told her I'd be happy to help, but I wanted to be involved in the planning and decision-making process, not just the funding. I asked for a family meeting to discuss Dad's care plan, the financial situation, and how we could all contribute both financially and practically. Mom seemed surprised by my request, but agreed to organize a meeting. At that meeting, I learned some interesting things. First, Dad's insurance was better than they'd initially thought, and the out-of-pocket medical expenses weren't as catastrophic as they'd feared. Second, several family members who'd never contributed money to anything were suddenly able to find funds when it was a real crisis rather than a luxury vacation. I contributed to Dad's care, both financially and practically. I took time off work to help drive him to appointments and assist with recovery tasks. But I did it as part of a coordinated family effort where everyone contributed according to their abilities, not as the sole financial resource, while everyone else participated in the emotional support aspects. During Dad's recovery, something shifted in our family dynamic. Maybe it was the reality check of a health crisis, or maybe my boundaries had finally started changing how people thought about our relationships. But the casual expectation that I'd fund things without question seemed to diminish. Update 3. A year after the Costa Rica incident, my sister got engaged. Traditionally, this would have meant a request for me to contribute to engagement party expenses, bridal shower costs, bachelor/bachelorette party funding, and various wedding-related expenses. Instead, my sister approached me differently. She asked if I'd be willing to contribute to her wedding costs, but she also gave me specific details about what the money would fund, what my role in the wedding planning would be, and how she envisioned including me in the various celebrations. More importantly, she apologized for the Costa Rica situation. Not a vague apology about misunderstandings, but a specific acknowledgement that they'd taken my money and excluded me from the experience, and that she'd been the one who'd argued against inviting me based on assumptions about my work priorities. She said she'd realized over the past year that she'd been treating me like a bank rather than a brother, and that she wanted to change that pattern before her wedding planning began. I was skeptical at first. Was this just a more sophisticated approach to getting money out of me for wedding expenses? But as the planning progressed, she followed through on her promises. I was included in decision-making conversations, invited to all the planning meetings, and given actual responsibilities beyond just financial contributions. The bachelor party was planned around dates that worked for everyone, including me. The engagement party included activities I'd enjoy, not just what my sister preferred. When conflicts arose between family members about wedding decisions, my input was sought and valued, not just my money. It felt like being treated as an actual family member rather than a financial resource. Final update. 2 years after the Costa Rica trip, my family planned another vacation, this time to Italy. When they started discussing it at a family dinner, I braced myself for the familiar pattern of being asked to contribute but not being included in the actual planning. Instead, Mom turned to me and asked what dates would work best for my schedule. They'd already looked at my work calendar pattern and identified windows when I'd be most likely to get time off approved. They presented 3 potential itinerary options and asked for my preferences. Most importantly, when it came to discussing costs, they broke down all expenses up front, explained how they'd be divided among all participants, and asked for my financial commitment only after confirming my actual participation. We went to Italy as a family. All of us. It was the first family vacation I'd been on in over 5 years where I felt like I was there as a family member rather than a financial contributor who'd been grudgingly allowed to tag along. On the last night of the trip, sitting at a restaurant overlooking the Tuscan countryside, my sister brought up Costa Rica. She said she'd been thinking about it a lot and wanted to acknowledge how much that experience must have hurt. She said seeing how much more enjoyable this trip was when everyone was actually included had made her realize what I'd been missing before. My aunt, who'd been the one to show me those painful photos 2 years ago, said she'd learned something important about family relationships. She said she'd always thought that as long as everyone seemed happy, the details didn't matter much. But she'd come to understand that how people are treated in the process of creating those happy moments matters just as much as the end result. Dad, who'd been quiet through most of this conversation, said something that stuck with me. He said that for years, he'd been proud of having a son who was so generous and willing to help family members. But he'd realized that he'd been proud of the wrong thing. He should have been proud of having a son who was generous, but he also should have been making sure that generosity was reciprocated with inclusion and respect. The Costa Rica trip had been a painful wake-up call, but it had ultimately forced necessary conversations about how our family treated each other. My decision to establish boundaries and demand actual inclusion rather than just financial contribution had initially felt like punishment, but it had evolved into something more constructive. I learned that I'd been enabling a dynamic that wasn't healthy for anyone. By always being available to fund things without question, I'd allowed my family members to avoid taking full financial responsibility for their choices. By accepting partial inclusion as normal, I'd allowed them to avoid considering whether their planning processes were truly inclusive. When I started requiring actual participation in exchange for financial contribution, it forced everyone to examine whether they really wanted me there or just wanted my money. Initially, it revealed that several family events had been more about accessing my resources than including me as a family member. But as the family adjusted to these boundaries, something better emerged. Events became smaller and more financially sustainable because they had to work within everyone's actual budget rather than relying on one person to subsidize them. Planning became more inclusive because my participation was required to make the finances work. Family members started contributing more equitably because they couldn't rely on me to cover the difference. The Costa Rica incident will always represent one of the most painful moments in my family relationships. The moment I realized I'd been valued more for my wallet than for my presence. But it also represents the turning point when I stopped accepting that dynamic and started demanding better. Sometimes the best thing you can do for your family is refuse to enable their worst habits, even when that refusal initially makes everyone uncomfortable. Sometimes love means setting boundaries that force people to examine whether they're treating you with the respect you deserve. I still contribute to family expenses, but now I do it as a member of the family who's valued for more than just my financial resources. I still help with family crises, but now I do it as part of a team rather than as the sole solution to everyone else's problems. And when we look at photos from family vacations now, I'm in them, not because I funded them, but because I was actually invited, included, and wanted there. That's worth more than any amount of money I ever contributed to experiences I was excluded from.